Rio de Janeiro, June 3, 1924. The steamship Antonio Delfino of the HSA Navigation Company had anchored in the port, and many travelers had already disembarked. Some families who wished to enter Brazil as colonists were waiting for new instructions on the pier. We, the Matthias Arnold family, with a wife, 4 sons, and 2 daughters, belonged to this group. Francisco, my oldest brother, was 22 years old, and I, the author of these lines, was 20. Following us came Juan at 16, Bernardo at 14, and the 2 girls, Maria and Margarete, at 13 and 10 years old, respectively. We had registered with the Brazilian offices as immigrants and needed to wait until all the colonists were together and our baggage was unloaded from the ship and cleared by customs. We were happy to be stepping on solid ground again after an 18-day sea voyage, having successfully completed this long journey. We were now in Brazil, the land we had chosen for our new home. Here we were, and what awaited us was an unknown question. We hoped for the best and looked to the future full of confidence. We intended to go to Santa Catarina to acquire fenced and demarcated lands there. Since we had to wait almost a week before we could travel south on a coastal steamship, the State Immigration Committee provided us with free accommodation. Our stay on Flores Island was very good, as the location was prepared to welcome many people. The lodgings and food were excellent. What was most important for us, above all, was that we had everything for free, as our money was scarce. It was also of great value to us that we would have free passage as far as possible by ship or train to the vicinity of the settlement area chosen by us. Our days on Flores Island were very interesting, as we were coming into contact with our future countrymen for the first time and beginning to see things we had never seen before. Everything was so different from what we knew. We had heard of or even read about many things, but experiencing them was entirely different. For the first time we ate black beans, sweet potato, cassava, and other foods we had not tried. During one of the walks my mother was greatly startled. There was a black woman in a wide-open window of a house ironing very white clothes. In her mouth, she had a large pipe and was blowing a lot of smoke. We laughed and looked at her, and she laughed back as well. Then suddenly we heard an unusual noise, slowly approaching along a partially overgrown path until a curve. The noise was produced by some ox carts crossing there. We had never seen anything like it. The wheels were greased with soap, but despite this the noise didn't cease. Initially we laughed at the way the carts were constructed, but later we had to build a similar cart, because as farmers we had to build everything ourselves. Well, there was still a long sea voyage to be made and another one by train. A coastal steamer heading for Florianopolis took us. It was not exactly a tourist trip. We did not have cabins or special dormitories. Everyone had to settle on the deck in the best way possible. Food was provided to us in tin pots, accompanied by a fork and spoon. It was similar to what we had received on Flores Island. It was tasty and nutritious, and we didn't have to pay anything for it. Our boat rocked a lot because the sea was very rough initially. Already on the first day, most travelers were seasick, including mother and the children. The next day, the boat docked in the port of Santos. The stay there was more prolonged because our ship was a freighter and had brought many crates, boxes, and other things for Santos and São Paulo. From there, it also took a new cargo for Florianopolis. We took advantage of the stop for a small walk through the city. At that moment, we realized how helpless one could be when in a strange country and not understanding a single word of its language. When we tried to buy anything in a store, naturally, no one understood us. We could only be understood when there was another customer who knew how to speak Portuguese and German. It certainly would have been very beneficial if we had taken a Portuguese course before emigrating. As it was, we needed an interpreter to get anything. When we arrived in Florianopolis after 3 days, we were approached, still on the ship, by brokers who offered us land in the municipality of Araranguá. We agreed with one of the sellers to first look at the lands, to choose something suitable, and then buy. To get there, we still needed to cover a small distance with another ship. And finally, as the last stage of our journey, we would do the rest by railway. This time, everything was faster. We left Florianopolis that same night on another small steamer and arrived the next morning in the port city of Laguna. On this boat too, we spent the night on the deck, and this was quite pleasant as it was a clear and mild night. I remember staying awake for several hours, looking at the moon and at the same time observing how our boat was rocking. We were already sufficiently used to this, but when you looked at the moon, you really got an idea of how a boat like that could rock. At times it seemed that the moon was high up and then it almost touched the sea, and so I lay there for a long time and dreamed with my eyes open until I finally fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, it was already daylight, and there was an unusual movement of people on our ship. We had arrived in Laguna, and our boat was being led to its place in the port. A short time later, we could disembark. It was Sunday, and we had finished our sea voyage. From then on, all expenses began to run on our account, with the exception of the train journey. In Laguna, we stayed in a kind of hotel. There too we had to make our beds on the floor, but we were already accustomed to this, as we could not afford a luxury hotel. It was good that we arrived in Laguna in the morning and could only travel on Monday, as we really needed a day of rest, both to relax and to put our things in order to continue the journey. Our next destination was the city of Criciúma. There, in 1924, there were already 2 coal mines. From Criciúma to the lands we wanted, there was no railway yet at that time. To reach the colony, one could go on horseback or on foot. One could make the trip in one day with a good horse, but on foot, it was very far. First of all, we had the train journey from Laguna to Criciúma ahead of us. On Monday morning, we went to the train station and obtained free passes from the officials. After all our baggage had been loaded, it wasn't long before the train departed. We had already experienced many things in the last few weeks, but that journey, in that super crowded carriage, was the most uncomfortable of all. Even so, we overcame this situation too, and we were all the more relieved when we could disembark in Criciúma. In Laguna, we had already met people from here who were making the return journey with us and introduced us to other people, thus introducing us to the locality. Through this connection, we quickly secured a residence, free of charge, outside the city but near one of the mines. This was great for us because our money was scarce and we needed to find work soon to support ourselves. The money we still had, we needed to buy land. My brother Francisco and I went to the mines to look for a job. He had already worked in a mine in Germany for at least 5 years, and I had also worked in a coal mine for a year. There was immediate interest in giving us employment, and the very next day we were in charge of a tunnel. The 2 of us already had practice, especially him. However, the difference between the working conditions we had here and those in Germany was so great that we almost gave up. Each of us first worked with another miner to learn the system. We were accustomed to doing most of the work with machines and compressed air picks. Here we had to do everything by hand. The meter-deep holes in the rock walls had to be drilled manually for the dynamiting. As a result, we had more stones than coal, and therefore, we earned almost nothing. Everything had to be learned. Someone who is accustomed to working with primitive means produces more than someone who did everything with the aid of machines. We simply had to forget what we knew and sweat more. While we stayed in Criciúma with mother and our younger sisters, father set off for Araranguá to examine the lands. He arrived the next day and found many Germans there. He liked the locality and bought 3 lots of 25 hectares each, totaling 75 hectares. There were plains and also hills, but not steep ones. A part of the land had already been cleared, and a building had been constructed because someone had been there before us. Those lands belonged to the government, and as people had settled without asking, they had to be vacated. It was good for us to already find a small area for planting, a pasture for livestock, and a very rudimentary house. Thus we didn't have to first clear the bush to settle. When father returned, he had a lot to tell. We were all curious and would have liked to have gone with him. However, this was not yet possible, nor was it necessary as it was already winter. Father took only João with him. He was still too young to work in the mines, but he could be very useful. At the time, there were many things to be resolved that could not be done during the planting season. It was in the middle of 1924 when father and my brother João made their foray to our new home. The location was called Pilão, and was situated on the banks of a secondary road that connected to a main road coming from the mountains towards Araranguá, in the upper part of the Jundia River near Morochato. There was no lack of work. First of all, we had to clean up some of the house's accommodations to make them habitable as much as possible. We quickly needed to build a fence for the vegetable garden so we could harvest cabbage, and the construction of a chicken coop was also on the program, along with whatever was necessary for the kitchen. We also needed furniture. All of this had to be made because there was a lot of wood, but no boards. The structure for the beds, tables, and everything else was made from strong, round pieces of wood tied together. The table coverings and the bed frames were made of laths, which were made from palm trees. Straw mattresses were then placed on the bed frames. While we earned some money in the coal mines for a while, Father and Brother João arranged for our house to become a little more habitable. A few months later, I went with my mother to the colony because she wanted to see what things were like there. The path was long and the heat was very intense. What I feared soon happened. Mother was exhausted on the very first day. We still had a long way to walk as we didn't yet own a horse to ride. We only went to the nearest village, and there I rented a room where we stayed until the next day. Having rested enough, we continued our journey. Unfortunately, after only an hour of walking, my mother could barely move, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, as if he had been called, a horseman came toward us, and as he got closer, we saw my brother João, on horseback, coming in our direction. Who could imagine such a thing? We could never have expected such a surprise. Father had bought a horse and sent his son to Criciúma as he needed money. The help came at the perfect time for us, as Mother could now ride. I had the money in my pocket, and we went on, arriving home still before nightfall. Father was very happy with the unexpected visit, and also because he wouldn't have to be alone any longer. We agreed to move permanently to the colony, as it was already time to start planting. I no longer wished to work in the coal mine, and my brother Francisco had not intended to stay there for a long time. If we had wanted to work as miners, we wouldn't have needed to emigrate. For the move, we rented an ox cart like the one we had seen on Flores Island. Since I already knew the way, I was in charge of accompanying the cart, while the others progressed more quickly with 2 horses and on foot. We had a very arduous task ahead of us to pass with our cart through a trail newly opened in the forest up to our dwelling. From the main road, we still needed about 2 hours to cross the bush, as the path had only been opened with a scythe and an axe. However, we also managed this, and at night, after a long time, we were all together again. Now we were in our own home. Even though it looked very primitive, it would soon be quite different. Right during the unloading, we realized how useful the boxes we brought from Germany with utensils would be. Unfortunately, there were only 2. One of them was very large and was transformed into a kitchen cabinet, and compared to the other furniture made of laths, it was our best piece. We could have brought many things from Germany if we hadn't been so unprepared. For example, we could have had a good kitchen stove to cook. We owned this in Germany and sold it for a pittance. However, we had to manage without these things, as a solution could be found for everything. To replace the stove, we built an apparatus for making fire in the corner of the house. 4 strong logs were driven into the ground, tied to others, and a box was built with laths, which was filled with mud and sand up to the height we wanted. Its surface was then smoothed. To hang the pots, there was a chain with hooks and an iron tripod, and there were also some stones to place the pots on. There was no chimney, and the smoke escaped freely. It was just a hut covered with palm branches and without a ceiling lining. The roof, viewed from below, looked as if it had been painted black. This was naturally the consequence of the smoke. The fact that the smoke hit the roof brought benefits, as the palm leaves in the roof were always full of cockroaches that would hide there at night. When we made a fire in the morning and the smoke penetrated the roof, it rained cockroaches. We had some ducklings that were already waiting for the door to open. For them it was a special meal, and at the same time we got rid of the cockroaches. The kitchen was initially the main room of our dwelling, serving simultaneously as the dining room, living room, and most importantly, for sleeping. We had installed 2 small quarters, if they could even be called that. which were in fact small, well-sealed recesses. But not only did mosquitoes manage to get in, it also happened twice that a venomous snake had entered at night. My sister Maria, who was already lying in the room next to us, began to scream, "There's a snake here!" We immediately ran over and saw a huge snake coiling itself on the sewing machine, which was near her bed. As soon as we removed the snake from the room, we quickly killed it. This also happened to my two younger brothers, João and Bernardo. The two of them were sleeping together in the same bed, and in the morning when they woke up, they realized they had a snake with them, coiled up during the night. One could even say we were very lucky that no one was bitten by it. During all this time, we did not hear of anyone being bitten despite there being many venomous snakes in Pilão. For the kitchen, we found a stream for the water source. This never dried up and provided good, clean water. Because of this, we dug a small well there to collect more and to be able to draw it more easily. Once, when I was in the kitchen, my mother went to fetch water with a bucket, and I immediately heard her scream as she had seen a snake there. I grabbed the bucket to fetch water, and then I myself was startled, because when I tried to dip the bucket into the water, another snake raised its head and hissed aggressively in my direction. But since I was no elderly lady, I managed to remove it from our well and kill it. There were also other types of venomous animals in the bush that required care. There were huge spiders, like the Goliath tarantula, as big as a cat, and ants that could leave a person in trouble if they were in their range. Once, inadvertently, I stepped on what I thought was a disused ant nest, and suddenly they were biting me. I threw myself into the water, and even so they would not let go of me, and I had to kill them one by one. Another time, as I walked bent over under a very thick bush, I hit my head right in the middle of a wasp nest that was hanging on a branch. I didn't have time to run, and the bush was very thick, so I couldn't escape. I could only protect my face with what I had on the ground, which was sawdust. However, these things accustomed us to the first times of colonization. One must learn the rules that apply to a new situation. The climate was hot in summer, mild in spring and also in autumn. Winter was very cold and lasted for almost 4 months. We had a lot of rain and also some periods of drought, but in the end we got used to it and did not suffer so much. Today, we are on the 27th of July, 1986. Therefore, more than 62 years have passed since we took the first steps in Brazil in Rio de Janeiro. Of our family, which initially consisted of 8 people, only 3 are alive. Me, my sister Maria, and the oldest, my brother Francisco. At the request of some of my descendants who would like to know more about their origin, I provide some information within my limitations. My father, Matthias Arnold, was the youngest son of his family, which was made up of small farmers, residents of the Saar region in Bettingen, Germany. He was born in 1870. His parents died young, and he was raised by an uncle. Later, after his military service, he went to live in Westphalia, where he worked in mining and also met his wife there. My mother, Johanna Martha Huschener, was born in 1875. In Kirchlinde in Martenkreis, Dortmund. She was the eldest daughter of a shoemaker. He, my grandfather, traveled to the United States and also wanted to bring his family there, but he disappeared when my mother was 12 years old. Thus my grandmother was left abandoned with 4 children and lived in extreme poverty. She survived by working as an ironer and a street vendor, offering small goods in residences. After my parents married, they moved to Oberhausen, Rhineland, where my father went to work as a miner. We lived in Oberhausen until the year 1924, when we moved to Brazil. In previous lines, I already mentioned recollections about experiences lived in the first days in this land. My mother passed away in the year 1932 from typhoid fever, at the age of 57. My father, Matthias Arnold, was 77 years old when he passed away. Laguna, October 1986. Hermann Arnold.
Subscribe for more real first-person historical stories and leave a comment if you have any family memoirs you would like to share.